It was 3 years ago, next month, that I sat alone at my kitchen table in the middle of the night at my house and decided I was going to take my own life. You see how tense it just got in here? Relax, I didn't do it. So I know what you're thinking. You're looking at me and say, Tim, you're smart, you're tall, you're charming, you're ridiculously handsome, and I know all this is true. So what brought me to this point in my life? Well, like 8% of the US population, I have clinical depression. And I first noticed it about 10 years ago, and I thought that it was just seasonal depression. But then suicidal thoughts started to pop into my head every once in a while, and over time they became more frequent. And after about a year, they were relentless. It's all that I could think about, so I needed help. So I got counseling. And what we learned after several months of counseling is that I use humor as a defense mechanism. So here's your check. Now at this point, the suicidal thoughts were just nonstop. So I tried everything. I changed my diet, I exercised, I meditated, I journaled. I even did that TMS thing where you go into a clinic and you get little electronic shocks to your forehead every 10 seconds for an hour. I did that every day for 3 months. Nothing worked. So I turned to medication. And not only were the side effects horrendous and a little too embarrassing to talk about here, but it didn't even work particularly well. So I stopped that. Then I read a book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. It was about the new science of psychedelics, particularly psilocybin mushrooms, and how it was upending every aspect of mental health. Every single major research facility was in on this. NYU, NIH, Berkeley, and right in our backyard, Johns Hopkins. And what they determined was that psilocybin mushrooms were extremely effective. Not moderately effective, not somewhat effective, but extremely effective at treating depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, sexual trauma, addiction, the list goes on and on. In fact, one study said that just one guided 4-hour psilocybin trip was more effective than 10 years of daily talk therapy. And they're completely safe. Of all the substances that are out there that are illicit, psilocybin mushrooms are by far the safest. So I searched high and low and got myself some mushrooms. And there's nothing more embarrassing than to have to call around your millennial friends looking to score some mushrooms. But I did. Then I rented an Airbnb downtown, and I don't want to mention where it was because the owner might be here tonight. So I got in, I settled in, I took my dried mushrooms and ground them into a little powder. I made a tea, drank it, and off I went. 45 minutes later, the walls were breathing in and out, and the shadows were dancing on the floor, and the rug was rippling like a little pond. Now, before my trip, I was terrified that by the end of the night, I'd be running down Main Street screaming and naked. But I was completely lucid. I was completely in control. So I thought, let's listen to some music. So I lay down on the couch, I put on my headphones, and I turned on some Simon and Garfunkel. And those harmonies were the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life. They were like euphoric ribbons of light, just weaving in and out of the darkness, and the notes were just showering over me like a trillion stars. So I started crying. It was a little bit at first, and then I was sobbing. Now, I'm an atheist, but I felt a presence in my head that I can only describe as an entity. And that entity held me, and it took all of the rotting, corrosive shit that I'd accumulated in my mind over the course of my life. Self-loathing, guilt, loneliness, fear. And I could stand here for 10 hours and tell you about my trip that night. But the end result was, at the end of my trip, my mind was at peace for the first time in my life. And the suicidal thoughts vanished, completely gone. Now, was my experience typical? Well, according to Johns Hopkins, among those who participated in psilocybin research, over 2/3 of them ranked the event among the top 5 events in their lives, including the birth of their child. And here's a tidbit. Among those for whom religion plays a large part of their life, almost all of them said that the trip deepened their faith and brought them closer to God. Yet, psilocybin mushrooms are still a Schedule I drug, along with heroin, cocaine, and crystal meth. 8 US cities have decriminalized psilocybin mushrooms, and 2 states allow it for the treatment of mental health. We need to legalize it. here in Annapolis, in Maryland, without the typical political foot dragging. Psilocybin mushrooms literally saved my life. It's made me a better husband, it's made me a better father and a better person. It has the potential to drastically improve the lives of tens of millions of people. So, if you know any elected officials, call them, tell them about this. And if you are an elected official, it's time to legalize now. Thank you very much.